They called me Aunty, but I'm only 19. My name is Maya, and I'm 19 years old, but you wouldn't believe it if you saw me walking down the street. Right now, I'm sitting in my dorm room, staring at my reflection in the mirror on my desk, and all I can think about is how the barista at Starbucks called me ma'am again this morning. Not just once, but twice. Here's your latte, ma'am. Have a great day, ma'am. I watched her serve the girl behind me, who's probably actually older than me, with a bright, thanks, hun. But me? I get the formal treatment reserved for someone's mother. They threw me into this adult world the moment I hit puberty, calling me auntie, and ma'am, when I was still playing with dolls, so I decided to stop hiding and start talking about what it really means to be young in a body that the world sees as old. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when it matters most. Now let me take you back to how this all began. The first time someone called me auntie, I was 14 years old, standing in line at the grocery store with my mom. I remember the exact moment because it felt like someone had punched me in the stomach without warning. The little boy behind us tugged on his mother's sleeve and pointed at me, whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mama, that auntie has the same cereal as us." I looked around, confused, expecting to see some middle-aged woman nearby. But his tiny finger was pointed directly at me. Me, with my braces still on, clutching a box of Lucky Charms because I was still young enough to get excited about marshmallow cereal. His mother looked embarrassed and quickly shushed him, but the damage was already done. I felt my cheeks burn as other shoppers glanced over, their eyes scanning me with a mixture of confusion and pity, and my mom tried to make light of it on the drive home. "You just look mature for your age, sweetheart. Some people would kill for that." But I didn't want to look mature. I wanted to look like the other kids in my freshman year of high school. I wanted boys my age to see me as a potential girlfriend, not someone they should respectfully address as if I were their teacher. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror for hours, trying to figure out what everyone else was seeing. My face had this settled quality to it, like someone had fast-forwarded through my 20s and 30s and landed me somewhere in my 40s. My eyes had lines around them that my classmates wouldn't develop for decades. My mouth seemed permanently set in what people called a serious expression, even when I was trying to smile. My body had curves that made me look like I should be carpooling kids to soccer practice, not worrying about my algebra homework. The worst part wasn't just looking older, it was the way people treated me because of it. Teachers spoke to me differently, like I was a peer rather than a student. Store clerks assumed I was shopping for my family, not myself. Other teenagers seemed intimidated by me, keeping their distance as if I were some kind of undercover authority figure waiting to report their teenage behavior to their parents. I started avoiding mirrors, but you can't avoid the world. Every interaction became a reminder that I was trapped in the wrong body, living the wrong life. When I should have been worried about acne and first crushes, I was dealing with the complex social navigation of looking like an adult while feeling like a child inside. The real breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I had finally worked up the courage to talk to Jake Morrison, this boy I'd had a crush on for months. He was sweet and funny, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he might see past my appearance to who I really was inside. I approached him after chemistry class, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Hey, Jake," I managed to say, trying to sound casual. "I was wondering if maybe you'd want to go to the movies this weekend?" He looked at me with such genuine kindness that for a moment, I thought he might say yes. But then his expression shifted to something like gentle concern. "Oh, that's really nice of you to offer, Mrs. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. But I'm only 17, and my parents would probably not be okay with me going out with someone your age. You seem really nice though." Mrs. he had called me Mrs. This boy, who I sat next to in chemistry class every single day for months, thought I was a teacher or someone's mother trying to ask him on a date. The humiliation was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't even correct him. I just nodded and walked away, feeling like I might throw up right there in the hallway. That's when I knew my senior year was going to be about survival, not thriving. I stopped trying to make friends my own age. I stopped hoping for a normal teenage experience. I focused on my grades and my college applications, telling myself that maybe college would be different. Maybe in a place where everyone was supposed to be adult, I'd finally fit in, but deep down, I was terrified that this was just the beginning. I was wrong about college being different. If anything, it was worse. A move-in day at State University should have been one of the most exciting days of my life. I dreamed about this moment through all 4 years of high school, the independence, the fresh start, the chance to reinvent myself somewhere new. I packed my bags with the same optimism every freshman has, convinced that college would be where I'd finally find my people. My roommate assignment letter had come months earlier, and I'd already been texting with Jessica, my soon-to-be roommate. She seemed sweet, a bubbly 18-year-old from California who was planning to major in communications. We'd exchange photos through social media, though I'd carefully chosen ones that were cropped close to my face, hoping to delay the inevitable shock for as long as possible. When I walked into our dorm room that first day, pulling my suitcase behind me, Jessica was already there with what appeared to be her entire family. Her mom, dad, and younger brother were all helping her arrange her side of the room, chattering excitedly about her new adventure. The moment I stepped through the doorway, all conversation stopped. That Jessica's mom was the first to recover. "Oh, hello. Are you Maya's mother? We're the Hendersons, Jessica's family. It's so nice to meet you." I felt that familiar sinking sensation in my stomach. "Actually, I'm Maya, your daughter's roommate." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's face went through about 5 different expressions in rapid succession: confusion, realization, embarrassment, and then a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her family exchanged those quick glances that people think you don't notice, the kind that communicate entire conversations in seconds. "Oh. Wow, hi." Jessica finally managed. "I'm so sorry, you look so different from your photos." Her dad cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, this is interesting. Are you sure there wasn't some kind of mix-up with the room assignments? Maybe you're supposed to be in graduate housing?" I wanted to disappear into the floor. Instead, I forced myself to speak calmly. "I'm 19. I'm a freshman, just like Jessica." The disbelief on their faces was painful to watch. Jessica's mom actually pulled out her phone, and I'm pretty sure she was Googling whether there were age restrictions on dormitory housing. Meanwhile, Jessica herself looked like she was reconsidering her entire college experience. After her family finally left, with several more bewildered glances in my direction, Jessica and I were alone in our room for the first time. The enthusiasm she'd shown in our text conversations had evaporated completely. She busied herself with unpacking, making polite but distant conversation about class schedules and meal plans. I could feel her stealing glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking, probably trying to process how she'd ended up rooming with someone who looked like she could be her aunt. That evening, there was a floor meeting for all the freshman residents. I walked into the common room hoping for a fresh start, maybe a chance to meet other students without the baggage of that disastrous first impression. The resident advisor, a cheerful junior named Katie, was explaining dorm rules and campus resources. When she noticed me sitting in the back, "Oh, are you someone's mom?" she asked with a friendly smile. "Parents are welcome to listen in, but we'll have a separate information session for families tomorrow morning." Every head in the room turned to look at me. 25, 18, and 19-year-olds, all staring at the woman who looked like she belonged at a PTA meeting rather than a college orientation. I felt my face burning with embarrassment, but I forced myself to speak up. "I'm Maya. I live in room 237. I'm a freshman." Katie's expression flickered with confusion before she quickly recovered her professional demeanor. "Oh. Of course, sorry about that. Welcome to Hartley Hall, Maya." But the damage was done. For the rest of the meeting, I caught other students whispering and pointing. Some looked curious, others seemed uncomfortable, as if my presence somehow disrupted their vision of what college was supposed to be like. When Katie started talking about floor activities and study groups, I noticed several students shifting in their seats, suddenly less interested in participating now that they knew the older woman would be involved. After the meeting, I tried to introduce myself to a few people, hoping to salvage something from the evening. Most were polite but distant, giving me the same kind of respectful treatment adults give to other adults they don't particularly want to befriend. A few seemed genuinely curious about my story, but their questions felt more like they were interviewing an interesting specimen than trying to get to know a potential friend. "So what made you decide to go back to school?" asked one girl named Amanda, clearly assuming I was some kind of non-traditional student returning to education after years in the workforce. "I'm not going back," I explained for what felt like the 100th time that day. "This is my first time. I'm 18, well, 19 now. I just graduated high school in May." Amanda's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? Wow. Wow. Have you seen a doctor about that?" The question hit me like a slap. Have I seen a doctor about existing in my own body? About having the audacity to look different from what people expected? I mumbled something about genetics and excused myself, retreating to my room where Jessica was video chatting with friends from home. I put on my headphones and tried to focus on unpacking, but I couldn't help overhearing parts of her conversation. She was telling her friends about her really strange roommate situation, and how she was going to talk to the housing office tomorrow about getting reassigned. She wasn't mean about it, she actually seemed concerned, like she was worried about my well-being rather than her own comfort. But somehow that made it worse. As I lay in bed that first night, listening to the sounds of other freshmen socializing in the hallway, I realized that college wasn't going to be the fresh start I'd hoped for. If anything, it was going to be high school all over again, except now I was surrounded by people who were supposed to be adults but still couldn't handle someone who didn't fit their expectations. I pulled out my phone and started Googling premature aging in teenagers, something I'd done countless times before. The search results were the same as always: medical articles about rare genetic conditions that didn't quite match my situation, forum posts from other people struggling with similar issues, and a depressing array of cosmetic surgery websites promising to help me to reclaim my youth. But this time, something was different. This time, instead of just reading other people's stories, I found myself wanting to tell my own. The next morning, I woke up to find Jessica's bed already made and her gone. She'd left a note on my desk, polite, apologetic, but final. She'd gotten approval to move to a different room and would be out by the end of the week. "It's nothing personal," she'd written. "I just think we might both be more comfortable with roommates who are in similar life stages." Similar life stages. As if being 19 meant I was in some completely different universe from her 18-year-old existence, I sat alone in our, now my room, staring at the note and feeling more isolated than I ever had in my life. At least in high school. I'd had the comfort of going home every day to family who knew me, who remembered the little girl I'd been before my body decided to fast forward through decades without my permission. Here, I was completely alone with my reflection and the growing certainty that I'd never fit anywhere. That's when I made the decision that would change everything, though I didn't know it at the time. I opened my laptop and created a new Instagram account. Not under my real name, I wasn't ready for that level of vulnerability yet. Instead, I chose the handle at old_soul_young_heart, and for my profile picture, I used a photo of my hands holding a cup of tea. Anonymous, but somehow still personal. For my first post, I didn't include any photos of myself. Instead, I wrote what felt like the truest thing I'd ever put into words: what do you do when the world sees you as someone you're not? When every mirror feels like a lie and every interaction feels like you're wearing a costume that doesn't fit. I'm 19 years old, and I've been called the ma'am and Aunty for so long that sometimes I forget what it feels like to just be a teenager. Today my roommate moved out because sharing a room with me made her uncomfortable. Not because I'm mean or messy or difficult to live with, but because I look like someone who could be her mother instead of her peer. I don't know why I'm sharing this with strangers on the internet, but I guess I'm tired of keeping this feeling locked inside where it just gets bigger and more painful every day. I hesitated for a long time before hitting post, but finally, I did it. Then I closed my laptop and tried to focus on getting ready for my first day of classes. Walking across campus felt like running a gauntlet. I could feel people looking at me, trying to figure out what I was doing there. Was I a professor? A graduate student? Someone's very young-looking mother visiting campus? The confusion in their faces was familiar, but it didn't hurt any less for being expected. My first class was Introduction to Psychology, held in one of those large lecture halls with tiered seating. I arrived early, hoping to find a seat in the back where I might blend in a little better. But as students filtered in around me, the same pattern played out that I'd experienced countless times before. They'd glance at me, do a double take, whisper to their friends, steal more glances. A few seemed to assume I was a teaching assistant or guest lecturer, giving me polite nods that felt more like professional courtesy than peer acknowledgement. When Professor Martinez walked in and began taking attendance, I held my breath during the moment when he called my name. Maya Patel? Here, I called out, and I watched his eyes search the room before landing on me with that familiar flicker of confusion. But to his credit, he just made his mark and moved on. It was a small mercy, but I was grateful for it. The class itself was fascinating. We were diving into concepts of identity and self-perception, but I couldn't focus completely because I was too aware of being watched and studied by my classmates. During the break, a few students approached me, and I braced myself for the usual questions. "Are you auditing this class?" asked a girl named Sarah, her tone friendly but cautious. "No, I'm enrolled," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I'm a freshman." Her eyebrows shot up. "Really? Wow. That's cool. Are you like really smart or something? Did you skip a bunch of grades?" I wanted to laugh at the irony. If only it were that simple. If only I could explain my presence here with some kind of intellectual achievement rather than the cruel lottery of genetics that had given me this face and body. No, I'm just 19. I know I look older. "Yeah, you really do," she said with the kind of blunt honesty that only teenagers possess. "Have you always looked like this?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized this was a moment of choice. I could deflect, make some joke, change the subject like I always did. Or I could try telling the truth for once. "Since I was about 14, I said quietly. It just happened. One day I was a normal-looking kid, and then gradually, I wasn't." Sarah's expression shifted to something like genuine sympathy. "That must be really hard." "I can't imagine." It was such a simple statement, but it hit me with unexpected force because it was the first time anyone had acknowledged that this might actually be difficult for me, rather than just strange or inconvenient for them. I felt tears pricking at my eyes and had to look away. When I got back to my empty dorm room that evening, I checked my phone and found something I hadn't expected. My Instagram post had gotten responses. Not many, maybe a dozen comments and a few dozen likes, but each one felt like a small miracle. I relate to this so much. Different situation, but I know what it feels like to not fit anywhere. You are not alone. Thank you for sharing this. This is so brave. I'm 23 and still struggle with feeling like I don't belong in my own life. One comment in particular stopped me cold. "I'm 17 and I have the same thing. Doctors don't know why. Thank you for making me feel less like a freak." I stared at that comment for a long time, reading it over and over. Someone else. Someone else. Who understood exactly what this felt like, who had lived with the same confusion and isolation and sense of being trapped in the wrong story. I clicked on her profile, at Jenny_not_my_age, and saw that she'd shared similar struggles, though she was braver than I was and included photos of herself. Looking at her pictures was like looking into a mirror, but one that reflected experience rather than appearance. She looked older too, maybe in her 30s, but her captions told the story of a teenager trying to navigate high school while looking like everyone's mother. Her posts were raw and honest and heartbreaking and somehow beautiful in their refusal to hide from the truth. I sent her a direct message that night. "Thank you for your comment. I've never met anyone else who understands this." She wrote back. "Within hours, I've been following stories like yours for months. There are more of us than you think. Have you ever thought about really talking about this? Like, really talking about what it's like? That conversation lasted until 3 in the morning. Jenny told me about the support groups she'd found online. The medical consultations that had led nowhere, the social situations that felt like minefields. But more than that, she told me about the power she'd found in owning her story instead of hiding from it. The thing is, she wrote, everyone acts like looking older is this terrible burden we should be ashamed of. But what if it's not? What if it's just different? What if we stopped apologizing for existing in bodies that don't match people's expectations? As I finally drifted off to sleep that night, I found myself thinking about her words. What if I stopped apologizing for existing? What would that even look like? I was about to find out. Over the next few weeks, my anonymous Instagram account became my lifeline. I started posting regularly, sometimes just thoughts about navigating campus life, other times deeper reflections on identity and belonging. Each post felt like releasing pressure from a valve I didn't even know had been building up inside me. The community that began forming around my content was unlike anything I'd experienced before. People shared their own stories of feeling displaced in their own bodies, not just those of us dealing with premature aging, but others struggling with chronic illness that made them feel older, people who felt trapped by their appearance in different ways, individuals who had never quite fit into the neat categories society expected. My follower count grew slowly but steadily. A few hundred became a few thousand. The comments section became a place where people felt safe sharing experiences they'd never told anyone else. I found myself staying up late responding to messages, offering support to strangers who understood my life better than anyone I'd met in person, but the contrast between my online community and my real-world isolation was becoming unbearable. At AT school, I'd settled into a routine of academic focus and social invisibility. I sat in the front row of my classes, participated actively in discussions, and earned the kind of grades that made professors remember my name. But outside of academic settings, I remained a ghost. Other students were polite when they had to interact with me, but no one sought out my company. I ate meals alone, studied alone, spent weekends alone in my room while the rest of the floor bonded over shared teenage experiences I felt locked out of. The loneliness was crushing, but what made it worse was the constant feeling that I was wasting what should have been the best years of my life. Every day felt like watching a movie of college life that I could observe but never participate in. Then came the night that changed everything. I was scrolling through TikTok, something I usually avoided because the platform seemed designed for people who looked like actual teenagers, when I came across a video that stopped me cold. It was a girl around my age, talking about her experience with a rare genetic condition that made her age rapidly. But unlike me, she was showing her face, speaking directly to the camera with a confidence I couldn't imagine possessing. People always ask me if I've tried this cream or that treatment, she was saying, as if looking different is a problem that needs to be solved instead of just a fact that needs to be accepted. Here's the thing, I've learned more about strength and authenticity in my 19 years than most people learn in a lifetime, and I wouldn't trade that wisdom for conventional beauty. The video had millions of views and thousands of comments, most of them supportive and encouraging. But what struck me wasn't just her confidence, it was the impact she was having. People were sharing their own stories, talking about their struggles with self-acceptance, thanking her for giving them permission to be proud of their differences instead of ashamed of them. I watched the video probably 20 times that night, studying not just what she said but how she said it. The way she looked directly into the camera, as if she was talking to a close friend. The way she owned her story instead of apologizing for it. The way she had transformed something that could have been a source of shame into a platform for helping others. That's when I realized what I had to do. Even though the thought terrified me completely, I opened my Instagram account and started typing a post that felt like jumping off a cliff. I've been hiding behind this anonymous account 4 months, sharing my story but never showing my face. I've been so afraid of judgment, so convinced that being visible would only invite more pain. But I've been thinking about courage lately, and I don't think it's the absence of fear. I think it's doing something important despite the fear. Tomorrow, I'm going to post a video of myself talking about what it's really like to be 19 in a body that looks 40. Not because I'm brave, but because maybe someone else needs to see that they're not alone in this experience. Maybe someone else needs permission to stop hiding too. I posted it before I could change my mind, then spent the rest of the night pacing my room and questioning my sanity. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments flooded in from followers who had been wondering what I looked like, who had been hoping I would take this step. But mixed in with the encouragement were expressions of genuine concern for my well-being, warnings about the internet's capacity for cruelty, advice about protecting myself from the inevitable backlash. By morning, I had nearly 100 messages in my inbox. Some were from followers sharing their own fears about visibility and authenticity. Others were from people offering support and encouragement for whatever I decided to do. But one message stood out from all the rest. It was from a literary agent named Rebecca Martinez. I've been following your account for weeks, and your writing about identity and self-acceptance is some of the most powerful I've seen. If you're serious about sharing your story more widely, I think there might be opportunities beyond social media. Would you be interested in talking? I stared at that message for a long time, trying to process what it might mean. Someone thought my words were worth sharing beyond the small community I'd built. Someone saw potential in my story that I hadn't even considered, but first, I had a video to make. I set up my phone camera in my dorm room, took a deep breath, and pressed record. Hi everyone. My name is Maya, and I'm 19 years old. This is what I look like. The words felt like stepping into sunlight after months in a cave, terrifying and liberating at the same time. For the first time since that little boy called me Aunty at the grocery store, I wasn't hiding from who I was. I was finally ready to let the world see me. The video went live at exactly 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, and within the first hour, I knew my life had changed forever. I sat in my dorm room watching the view count climb, hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. The comments were coming in so fast I couldn't keep up with reading them. My phone was buzzing constantly with notifications, and I found myself switching between exhilaration and panic as I tried to process what was happening. The support was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people thanking me for my courage, sharing their own stories of feeling different or displaced, expressing gratitude for seeing someone who looked like them or felt like them finally being visible. But mixed in with the love were the inevitable cruel comments that come with any kind of internet visibility. This has to be fake. No way, she's actually 19. Someone needs to report this catfish. This is what happens when you don't take care of yourself. So sad. She's obviously lying about her age for attention. Each cruel comment felt like a physical blow, but what surprised me was how quickly other people jumped to my defense. My followers, people I'd never met but who had been part of my journey for months, were fighting back against the trolls, sharing articles about premature aging conditions, educating commenters about the realities of looking different than your chronological age. By the end of the first day, the video had over 100,000 views. By the end of the week, it was approaching 1 million. The attention was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My Instagram followers jumped from 3,000 to over 50,000 in a matter of days. Media outlets started reaching out for interviews. Other influencers and activists began sharing my content and inviting me to collaborate, but the most powerful response came from people who looked like me. Direct messages filled with photos and stories from others dealing with premature aging, genetic conditions that affected their appearance, or simply the experience of not looking like what people expected. There were teenagers who looked older, adults who looked younger, people whose disabilities made them targets of stares and whispers. The common thread was the isolation, the feeling of being alone in an experience that no one else seemed to understand. One message in particular stopped me cold. It was from a 17-year-old named Alex. I saw your video and cried for an hour because it was the first time I realized I wasn't a freak. I have the same condition as you, and I've been thinking about hurting myself because I can't handle being stared at anymore. But seeing you be proud of who you are, maybe I can learn to do that too. I stared at that message until the words blurred with my tears. Someone was considering ending their life because of the same struggle I'd been living with for years. My decision to show my face hadn't just been about overcoming my own fear, it had potentially saved someone else from the darkest thoughts I'd had on my worst days. I spent that entire night responding to messages, especially the ones from people who were struggling. I realized I had accidentally become something I never intended to be, a voice for people who felt voiceless, a face for people who felt invisible, but with visibility came complications I hadn't anticipated. The first challenge was my campus life. The video had included enough details about my college experience that it didn't take long for people to figure out where I was enrolled. Suddenly, I couldn't walk across campus without being recognized. Some people approached me with genuine kindness and support, but others treated me like a celebrity or, worse, like a circus attraction they could gawk at and discuss. Why professors' attitudes toward me shifted too. Some became overly solicitous, as if my internet fame somehow changed my academic capabilities. Others seemed skeptical, as if my online presence was somehow incompatible with serious scholarship. I found myself having to work twice as hard to be taken seriously as a student rather than just as that girl from the viral video. The second challenge was my family's reaction. My parents had always been supportive but private people, and suddenly their daughter was sharing intimate details of her life with strangers on the internet. My mom called me crying after she saw the video, not because she was upset, but because she felt guilty for not understanding how much I'd been suffering. "I thought you were handling it well," she said through tears. "I thought telling you to embrace being mature was helping. I didn't realize how much you were hurting inside." My dad, never one for emotional conversations, simply said, "I'm proud of you for being brave enough to tell your truth. But are you sure you're ready for all the attention this might bring?" He was right to be concerned. Within 2 weeks of the video going live, I started receiving interview requests from major media outlets. CNN, Good Morning America, The Ellen DeGeneres Show, producers were reaching out wanting to feature my story. The literary agent who had contacted me was now talking about book deals and speaking opportunities. It was exciting and terrifying in equal measure. Part of me was thrilled at the opportunity to reach even more people, to continue building the community of support that had become so precious to me. But another part of me was overwhelmed by the speed at which everything was moving and uncertain. Whether I was ready for that level of exposure, the decision became easier when I received a message that put everything into perspective. It was from Jenny, the first person who had reached out to me when I started sharing my story anonymously. "Maya, I've been watching what's happening with your video, and I wanted you to know something. 3 different people have reached out to me this week saying they found my account through yours. People who never would have known they weren't alone in this if you hadn't been brave enough to show your face. You're not just telling your story anymore, you're creating a movement. Don't let anyone convince you that your voice isn't important enough for the biggest platforms." That night, I made the decision that would define the next phase of my life. I called Rebecca Martinez, the literary agent, and told her I was ready to explore bigger opportunities. I accepted interview requests from 2 major morning shows. And I started planning content that went beyond just my personal story to address the larger issues of appearance-based discrimination, ageism, and the ways society fails people who don't fit conventional expectations. But first, I had one more video to make. This one would be different, not just about my experience, but about the community we were building together and the changes we could make if we refused to hide anymore. As I set up my camera that night, I thought about how far I'd come from that scared, isolated freshman who couldn't bear to look in mirrors. I was still the same person inside, but now I had found my voice, my purpose, and my people. I looked directly into the camera and started speaking. What started as one person's story of feeling different has become a community of thousands of people refusing to be invisible anymore. Today, I want to talk about where we go from here. The second video was different. Instead of just sharing my personal struggle, I talked about systemic change, how appearance-based discrimination affects employment, education, healthcare, and social opportunities. I shared statistics I'd researched about ageism and lookism, interviewed other people from my growing community via video calls, and laid out a vision for a world where people weren't judged by how well they fit physical stereotypes. This video exploded even faster than the first one. Within 48 hours, it had 2 million views and had been shared by major advocacy organizations, celebrities, and news outlets. The hashtag appearance justice that I'd included started trending on multiple platforms, but with greater visibility came greater scrutiny. The backlash was swift and vicious. Suddenly, internet detectives were digging into every aspect of my life, trying to find evidence that I was lying about my age or my experiences. They found my high school yearbook photos and created conspiracy theories about photo manipulation. They contacted my former teachers asking for a verification of my story. Some even reached out to medical professionals, demanding explanations for how someone could really look the way I did. The worst part wasn't the strangers questioning my authenticity, it was watching my family and friends get dragged into the chaos. My parents started receiving phone calls from reporters. My high school classmates were being contacted for comments about knowing me. Even Jessica, my former roommate, was approached by a gossip blog wanting to know about her experience living with the viral aging girl. I realized I had underestimated how cruel the internet could be when someone became too visible, too successful at challenging comfortable assumptions about how the world should work. The morning I was scheduled to appear on Good Morning America, I woke up to find that someone had posted my parents' home address online, along with photos of our house and my dad's car. The caption read, "If Maya Patel is really 19, her parents should be able to prove it. Maybe it's time someone paid them a visit." I called my mom immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with stress. "Maya, honey, there are people outside our house. They have cameras. Your father had to take a different route to work this morning." That's when the reality of what I'd started truly hit me. I hadn't just made myself visible, I'd inadvertently put my entire family at risk. The online community that had felt so supportive suddenly felt dangerous, like a foresight unleashed without understanding its potential for destruction. I almost canceled the TV appearance. I sat in the green room at the studio, watching other guests prepare for their segments while I battled a panic attack that made it hard to breathe. What if I said something wrong? What if I made things worse for my family? What if this whole thing had been a terrible mistake? But then my phone buzzed with a text message from Alex, the 17-year-old who had messaged me about considering suicide. "Watching you on TV today. My parents are watching too. First time they've really understood what I've been going through. Thank you for not giving up." That message reminded me why I'd started sharing my story in the first place. Not for fame or attention or even validation, but because somewhere out there, someone else was sitting alone in their room, feeling like a freak, convinced they were the only person in the world who understood this particular kind of pain. When they called my name and I walked onto that bright television set, I carried the stories of everyone who had trusted me with their experiences. I spoke not just as Maya Patel, the college student who looked older than her age, but as the voice of a community that had been invisible for too long. The interview went better than I could have hoped. The hosts were respectful and genuinely curious about my experience. They asked thoughtful questions about the medical aspects of premature aging, the social implications of appearance-based discrimination, and the online community I'd accidentally created. Most importantly, they gave me time to address the people who were watching and might be struggling with similar issues. "If you're out there feeling like you don't fit anywhere," I said, looking directly into the camera, "I want you to know that your differences aren't defects. They're not problems that need to be solved or hidden. They're part of what makes you uniquely qualified to understand experiences that others can't, to offer perspectives that the world needs to hear." The response was immediate and overwhelming. My social media mentions exploded with messages of support and gratitude. The #appearance justice hashtag started trending again, this time with people sharing their own stories of discrimination and resilience, but more importantly, organizations started reaching out with concrete opportunities to turn this attention into systemic change. The American Association of Retired Persons wanted to partner with me on anti-ageism campaigns. Several major corporations reached out about consulting on inclusive hiring practices. Universities began inviting me to speak about appearance-based discrimination in academic and social settings. The months that followed my decision to turn down Netflix were some of the most challenging and rewarding of my life. I had to learn how to balance my growing platform with my commitment to being a college student, how to maintain my advocacy work without letting it consume my entire identity, and how to build authentic relationships while being in the public. EYEMY support group evolved into something bigger and more structured. We partnered with the University Counseling Center to create formal programming around appearance-based discrimination and self-acceptance. Other colleges started reaching out, wanting to replicate our model on their campuses. What began as a few students meeting in a dorm room had become a recognized student organization with funding, resources, and a waiting list of people wanting to join, but the real transformation wasn't in the programs we created or the policies we influenced. It was in the relationships I built and the person I became through those connections. Marcus and I ended up dating during our sophomore year, a relationship that taught me what it felt like to be seen and loved by someone who understood the complexity of living in a body that didn't match the world's expectations. Priya became the sister I'd never had, someone who could make me laugh until my stomach hurt and challenge me when I took myself too seriously. The entire group became my chosen family, the people who knew me not as Maya from that viral video, but as Maya who ate chocolate before exams and cried during Disney movies and stayed up too late trying to perfect her research papers. The MY online platform continued growing, but I was more intentional about how I used it. Instead of sharing every detail of my personal life, I focused on amplifying other voices, creating educational content about discrimination and self-acceptance, and building resources for people navigating similar challenges. The community that had formed around my initial vulnerability became something bigger than my individual story. It became a movement of people choosing authenticity over conformity, connection over perfection. By my junior year, I'd been invited to speak at conferences, consult with organizations on inclusive practices, and even testify before Congress about appearance-based discrimination. But I never lost sight of what mattered most, the daily choice to show up as my authentic self in a world that often demanded something different. Looking back now, as I prepare for graduation and think about the future I want to build, I realize that the little boy who called me Aunty at the grocery store when I was 14 did me an unexpected favor. He forced me to confront the gap between who I was inside and how the world saw me, and that confrontation ultimately led me to discover something profound about the nature of belonging. I learned that fitting in isn't about making yourself smaller or different to match other people's expectations. It's about finding the people who see your differences not as flaws to be fixed but as strengths to be celebrated. It's about building communities where authenticity is valued over perfection, where vulnerability creates connection instead of isolation. Most importantly, I learned that our perceived limitations often become our greatest gifts. My appearance, which had been a source of shame and isolation for so many years, became the bridge that connected me to thousands of people who felt just as displaced in their own bodies and lives. The very thing that made me feel like I didn't belong anywhere ultimately helped me create spaces where everyone could belong. I still get called ma'am and auntie by strangers who see my face and make assumptions about my age. But now, instead of feeling diminished by those moments, I feel grateful for the journey that brought me to a place where I can respond with confidence. Actually, I'm 19, and I'm exactly where I belong. The mirror in my dorm room, the same one where I used to study my reflection with such despair, now reflects back someone I genuinely like. Not because my appearance changed, but because my relationship with myself transformed completely. That 19-year-old looking back at me has learned to see her differences not as a burden to carry but as a superpower to wield with purpose and pride.